Let me start by saying something that will immediately separate people into two camps. You cannot be a Calvinist and a patriotic constitutional American at the same time, at least not consistently, not honestly, and not historically. That may sound harsh, but truth usually does when it collides with tradition. America was founded as a constitutional republic, and that form of government rests on a few non-negotiable assumptions, which is contrary to Calvinism. For example, liberty of conscience, consent of the governed, limited authority, equality under the law, and personal moral responsibility. Our system assumes that individuals can choose, they can dissent, they can disagree, they can be wrong, they can be right, and they can still be free. Rights exist before government. Conscience answers to God, not the state. The system only works if human beings are treated as real moral agents. But classical Calvinism denies that very foundation. Historically, Calvinism does not begin with liberty. It begins with a decree. It does not trust persuasion. It trusts authority. And when given power, it has never restrained itself by principle. It has only been restrained by force. When classical Calvinism held civil authority, it did not say, "Let every man answer to God." It said, "Conform." Disagreement was not treated as error. It was not something to debate. It was treated as rebellion, not merely theological rebellion, but also social and political rebellion and social disorder. And once doctrine is tied to public order or disorder, coercion is no longer an accident. It's inevitable. A constitutional republic restrains government because it assumes people can choose rightly. Now, let me say that again. A constitutional republic does not restrain people, it restrains government because it assumes that people can choose rightly or wrongly and must be free to do so. Calvinism restrains people because it assumes outcomes are fixed and authority must be preserved. That is why these two systems collide. Some will immediately respond, but Calvinists don't persecute anyone today. That is not because Calvinism has changed. That's because the Constitution forbids them. Modern religious liberty protects Calvinism, but not just the Calvinists, the Baptists, the Catholics, the Jews, and every others, believers and unbelievers, saved and lost. Not because Calvinism embraces soul liberty, but because the constitutional republic refuses to allow any religious system to wield the sword. Remove the restraint, and history tells you exactly what will follow. History repeats itself. And this pattern is older than Calvinism itself. Satan's most effective strategy has always been the union of religion and government. Pagan empires mastered it. Rome perfected it. The medieval Catholic system institutionalized it. You control belief and you control people. Sanctify authority, and dissent becomes a sin and a crime. Scripture tells us this pattern will reach its final form in the last days. Government power is pictured as a beast. The religious system that legitimizes it rides that beast, the great whore of Revelation. One supplies force, the other supplies justification. So the one can say, well, here's a heretic, and the other one can persecute the heretic and be justified. Now, why does this matter? Because religious systems that deny real human choice are perfect tools for control. If people are taught they cannot truly choose, obedience becomes virtue and resistance becomes rebellion. And so the government sanctifies itself and protects itself under the umbrella and the bulwark of Calvinism. Authority becomes untouchable. Accountability disappears. This is not Christianity. This is domination. And when classical Calvinism, historical Calvinism, the Calvinism of John Calvin, when it gains power, it does the same thing every time. You see, here's what happened. The Reformation wanted to reform Catholic doctrine and change some of the things that the Catholic Church preached. But it did like the Catholic way or mode in which it wielded its power. And so, where John Calvin lived and where he had a lot of influence in Geneva, Switzerland, church discipline was enforced by civil law. And he was glad to have it so. Attendance was compulsory. Dissent was punishable. In the Netherlands, for example, Calvinist leaders used government authority to silence the people that were against that. They were called the remonstrates. They imprisoned ministers and exiled dissenters. In Scotland and parts of Switzerland and Germany, Reformed churches function as arms of the state. This is unbiblical, but this is really the embryo of Calvinism. Rome was rejected, but coercion remained. The Pope was gone, but the method that the Pope used is the same. Councils replaced popes. Confessions replaced tradition. Magistrates replaced bishops. But dissent was still examined, condemned, and punished. Personal conviction was crushed under enforced orthodoxy. And America has been no exception. When Calvinism held power in early New England, religious liberty vanished. Voting was restricted. Political office was restricted. Dissent was criminalized. Roger Williams, First Baptist, started First Baptist Church in America. He was banished. Why? Because he believed in soul liberty. Ann Hutchinson was expelled. Baptists were whipped and imprisoned. Quakers were beaten and executed. And let me be absolutely clear. This is not Rome. This is Calvinism when it has civil authority. Some excuse this by saying, well, that was just the spirit of the age. That is false. And of course, you could excuse the people that said that in the days of Jesus or when they killed the martyrs. It's never right to do wrong in order to get a chance to do right. Even then, there were believers who rejected coercion. Early Baptists and free church Christians preached voluntary faith and soul liberty. They were persecuted precisely because liberty threatens control. History exposes this truth. When classical Calvinism was unrestrained, it enforced conformity. When restrained, it claims tolerance. The system reveals itself not when limited, but when empowered. And that's the way it is with all false doctrine. A theology that denies human freedom in salvation will always deny freedom of conscience and belief, because you cannot defend liberty with theology built on decree. You cannot defend the Constitution with a system hostile to conscience and freedom. If you value soul liberty, if you value conscience, if you believe God created man as a responsible, moral agent, we want you to stick with us. This system cannot survive the light. It never has, and it never will.
All right, so we're talking about one of your passion projects here, and your pulpit ministry has not taken a slant this way, but you definitely have put a lot of study into Calvinism. And here's the problem, and this is one of the ailments you expressed to me about this whole thing, is that Calvinism, many, especially Baptists, like that we rub shoulders with, would say they're not Calvinist, but they buy into a lot of tenets of Calvinism unknowingly because they repeat these things that sound good, and a lot of times at funerals. And all it is it's Calvinism dressed up as kind of comfort for the morning, something to kind of ease our mind when bad things happen. And so certain things, like people say, when your number's up, your number's up.
Calvinism.
People say everything happens for a reason.
That's right.
That's Calvinism.
That's Calvinism.
Things like this. And you know what? They sound good, but they're unbiblical. You preached a good sermon several weeks ago. It was called Time and Chance. And people just don't understand that the Bible says time and chance happens.
It says it right there.
And so there are going to be things that happen that they had happened for no reason. There's just no good reason. It just happened.
Right. Well, let's go ahead and start right there. And so a Calvinist is a fatalist.
That's right.
They believe in divine determination. In other words, it's going to happen because God's going to make it happen. Mm-hmm. They would say his determinate counsel or whatever. And so they say, well, for example, let's start off even going back another step from where I was going. And they would say, okay, so God knows what's going to happen because he's going to make it happen. Now, to me, that's a puny God. To me, God is not bound by time, but he's the master and creator of time. Mm-hmm. So God knows the beginning from the end. And Jesus said before Abraham was, I am. And he is the eternal God. You know, eternal, is just as far back from everlasting to everlasting. Mm-hmm. Thou art God. And so we believe that time does not threaten God.
Amen.
Or his power or his authority,
right,
or, here's a big buzzword, his sovereignty. But on the other hand, Calvinists, they say, well, if man truly had free will, then God would not know the outcome. That's a puny God. God knew that it was going to happen, not because he's going to make you do it, because of foreknowledge. Right. Calvinists, they don't believe in foreknowledge. They believe in foreordination. Mm-hmm. That's what they believe. And so, yeah, it creeps in. These buzzwords creep in, mm-hmm. And sovereignty is a big one.
Yep.
Well, God is indeed sovereign, but in his absolute sovereignty, he permits free will. Mm-hmm. You see, rather than, no, you can't have free will because I don't know what they're going to do. But God is, again, he knows the end from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And not because he makes it happen, not because he's a determinist, and that's, Calvinists love that word, determinism, but because he knows it's going to happen.
Yep. And this whole doctrine really it seems to have been born out of, a struggling with people dying and going to hell and going to heaven. And it kind of branched out of that God chooses some for heaven and some for hell. That's a basic tenet of Calvinism. If you're going to buy into that, you necessarily have to now construct this God who, from time eternal, he determined that, well, you and I would be sitting here right now. And, everything I'm saying is not my choice, but it's predetermined by God. And so nobody really has a free choice in this, but it's predetermined.
Now, the Calvinists, they will resist that tooth and nail, but they have to agree with it because that's where it logically lands.
And that's what the problem is. These soft Calvinists, there's no such thing as a soft Calvinist.
There's no such thing as a 2-point or a 3-point Calvinist.
Yeah, because if you buy into one tenet, you may reject others. It's only because of your naivety and because you will not follow your thinking to its logical endpoint. Because if God determines some for heaven and some for hell, if God must have everything predetermined in order to be sovereign, it can lead nowhere else than the fact that, yes, God did ordain every sin that's ever taken place. He made it happen.
Yeah, and it makes God worse than the devil. Mm-hmm. If God controls everything, that means he controls the devil. Mm-hmm. And the devil has absolutely no freedom. The devil has to do exactly what God tells him to do. And so here it is, the devil can only tempt us with sin, but you got God tempting or causing the devil to tempt us with sin. Mm-hmm. Whereas James says, God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempted he any man.
Right.
And but the Calvinist mindset, they have to rewrite the whole Bible. You know, they have to explain everything away. That's why Calvinism appeals to the intellect. You know, they've got to have an answer. And by the way, Calvinism wasn't born in Bible study. It was not born in a preacher, you know, looking at the scriptures and then trying to get a sermon on Sunday. He says, "Oh man, I never saw this before." You know where it was born? It was born in institutions.
Yeah.
You know, that's the way to remember the institutes, Calvin's institutes of the Christian religion. Just think of institutes. So it was really born in the heart of cynical and critical scholars, you know, that did not have an answer for everything. These are just Gnostics and Arians, you know, is what it is. That they just don't have an answer, and so they've got to add a touch of philosophy into it. It is not based on the Bible at all.
Yeah, Calvinism, it creeps in, and unknowingly we buy into tenets of Calvinism. And that was such a strong point you made. And this is, I'll just say this right now. Also, you're as well as the other books that you've written. You got the one on Revelation and creation, and you got several books that you've written. Now you're working on one on Calvinism.
Yeah.
And so we'll have that. We'll have the link for that for you here soon. And I'll put the links for his other books down in the description as well. You can grab those. But this chapter that you were just sharing with me on freedom. A free society is based in the exact opposite of Calvinism. And it's so fascinating to go back, and every deviation from biblical Christianity produces control of thought and coercion into beliefs.
And we see that today with feminism and the transgender movement. They're going to force you to think the way that they think.
Yep.
Yeah.
As much as these America-hating, modernists, man, they think that America's just this oppressive, evil in the world. As a bunch of, liberals, they have no idea what they're talking about. But as much as you may hate to admit it, America is built upon Christian tenets, and the biblical foundation that it was built upon has produced individual liberty.
Absolutely.
And you get away from that, and you start buying into Calvinist philosophy, it's going to lead right into, the same thing we had, like you said, in colonial America, the Puritans, and they squashed dissent.
They absolutely did.
Banished
Roger
Williams, and even executed. This is going on in Geneva, like you said, and punishing dissenters.
John Calvin kind of felt like, well, it's good to get rid of a couple bad apples, referring to Anabaptists, and talking about executing them because of theological dissent.
Yep.
And so those people that are wrong and feel like, well, we can't win an argument. What we've got to do is we've got to use, bullying tactics.
Force.
You got to use force. We've got to silence them. And Democrats do the same thing. When you know that you don't have the high ground, when you know that you don't have the goods to back up your position, and you're losing people, the only way to keep that thing propped up is by force.
Yep.
Right.
That's why
you got to silence anybody
Yep.
that is going to expose your broken down system.
That's why the left always turns violent.
Always.
In their protests and all their demonstrations, always turns violent. Always they revert to ad hominem, completely changing the point of the argument and just launching personal attacks and insults, because it cannot stand up to any kind of logical introspection. And
yes.
But yeah, the Calvinist mindset is completely at odds with the what we enjoy today, Christian liberty. Which is what we have, and it's fast fading because of the Democrat mindset, because of the liberals that want to just revert right back to thought control of belief, this controlling system.
And that has been the history of Calvinism. Now, they're not going to tell you that, but somebody should. I mean, you can't deny it. For example, so when Calvinism started to take off, and it started with John, but by the way, John Calvin didn't start it. He just systematized it.
Okay.
It goes way back, But anyway, and so there was a bunch of preachers in Holland, Michigan, and they dissented. And so back in those days, you're miles and miles apart, hundreds of miles apart. and Geneva, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. That's a long ways away, so you're not in great danger. But so these preachers, they came to be called, those people that rejected Calvinistic theology were called the remonstrants. There's about 40 of them, and they spoke out for others that rejected Calvinism, because they were being persecuted in Holland, because that's what it does. Mm-hmm. Calvinism does not believe in freedom, and so all they did was put together a petition. They petitioned the government for just be tolerant. They weren't trying to say, ban Calvinism. They were just saying, let us worship God the way that we believe that we should. Same Bible, different interpretation. Well, for a while, the government went that direction. Mm-hmm. But it came to the point where finally the Calvinists that were in Geneva, they put together what is now known as TULIP. And it came to a head in Holland. And finally, when the vote came down, the government adhered to Calvinism, and that country became a Calvinist state. And then all those remonstrants, all those that believed in Jacob Arminius or free soul liberty, they were persecuted, exiled.
Wow.
That's what Calvinism does. Mm-hmm. That's what it always does. Mm-hmm. And we need the First Amendment of the Constitution not to protect us from the Democrats and the Catholics, but also from the Calvinists. Many Baptists call brethren.
And you say this a lot, and might sound harsh to some, but if the Calvinists had their way, they would go right back to killing Bible-believing Christians.
Yeah, because the theology hasn't changed.
Exactly. Yeah, and if the same thing with the Muslims, of course, that's a little more obvious because they literally say it. But these moderate Muslims that you say are such good neighbors, yeah, they are now until they get power. And then
Lebanon is a perfect example of that. Lebanon,
the Catholics as well. For years, they persecuted Christians,
condemned.
And as much as they want to pretend they're ecumenical now. Anything but biblical Christianity is going to revert to coercion.
Absolutely.
And that's why, and you made this great parallel in the chapter, and I think you referenced it. That's the whole idea between the great whore in Revelation, which is false religion, and she has this unholy relationship with the beast, which is government. Why is that? Because a religion has gone bad when it has this incestuous relationship with the government.
Yes.
And they're working hand in hand.
Yes.
Which has been, throughout all of history.
Yes. Maybe we'll do another podcast on this, but I do want to make it clear that a classical Calvinist, and basically a Calvinist today, is going to trace his roots back to classical Calvinism. Mm-hmm. Soft Calvinist, 2-3 point, doesn't make any difference. Hates the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. Yep. Hates freedom of conscience. Yep. Hates freedom of speech. And history has proven that when Calvinists get the upper hand, they squash it.
Yep. So true. It is incompatible with the American way of life.
Yeah. In fact, Jefferson said this. He says, after reading Calvinism, he said, I could never worship the Calvinist God. I think he called the Calvinist God a monster. I do too.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a monster. Creating
worse
people.
Than the devil.
Creating people, for his good pleasure, and then telling them they need to get saved, but not giving them the ability. Created them, in their mind, for eternal damnation in hell.
Yep, for all of eternity, for the glory of God.
Yes.
And you ought to be happy about it.
Yeah, we all got to sing praises about it. Unbelievable.
Well, this is a subject that you have done some really extensive study on, and so I'm excited for this book to come out, and this is kind of like a teaser of it, and this is just the tip of the iceberg of some of the things that you're going to lay out in that. I'll be looking for that, but in the meanwhile, I'll put the link to your website down in the
Let me
description.
just say something about this in case folks haven't heard this before, but it was actually you that inspired me. I taught through Revelation 3 times, 3 years, verse by verse. I've been here forever, and so you said, well, why don't you guys just put this in book form, and I didn't even know what you were talking about, and this is several months ago, and then I did, and then I thought, well, man, I got notes, on several other areas of study, and so yeah. And one of these areas has been Calvinism. I've done a deep dive into Calvinism, not on everything, but Calvinism is one of them. I hate Calvinism, but Calvinism, I'm not sure what's done more destruction, Calvinism or Catholicism. I don't know. But if it's not right, it's wrong.
Amen.
Jesus said, if you're not for me, you're against me. So anyway, I just put all my notes together. So all the study's already been done, for the most part. And then, we'll see when it comes out. Maybe another week or two. I don't know, maybe a month. It just depends. I only get a day or two a week to really work on it.
Yeah. But you have a website with all the books, and so this one will soon be added as soon as it's ready. So I'll put the link in the description. So as soon as this one's ready, that link will take you to the books that he's written. And then when this one's ready, it'll also be there. And that'll be down in the description so people can take a look at that, and you see your website there. And but yeah, I'm excited about it. They're all fantastic. I've been able to read most of them. So, but anyway, thanks for listening today, and go ahead and check out down in the description. If you didn't yet, click like on the video right now. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't. We'd like to have you along with us weekly. We'll be back in with you next week.